Imagine standing on the bridge of one of the most powerful warships ever built. Billions of dollars of steel, weapons, and technology surrounding you. The most advanced radar systems in human history scanning the skies. And then your screen fills up, not with one target, not with 10, but with hundreds. Hundreds of small, cheap Iranian drones swarming toward you from every direction at once. Your point defense systems are firing. Your crew is running. And then comes the order no American admiral ever thought he would give. Retreat. Pull back. Get out of the strait. Because tonight, the United States Navy does not control the Strait of Hormuz. Iran does. And what happens next will send shockwaves through every economy on Earth. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly why what is happening right now in the Persian Gulf is not just another Middle East conflict. This is the beginning of something the world has never seen before. And most people have absolutely no idea how deep this goes. Let us go back to where this all began, because to understand the Strait of Hormuz crisis today, you need to understand the decision that started the fire. On the 28th of February 2026, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated military operation against Iran called Operation Epic Fury. This was not a limited strike. This was not a warning shot. The opening salvo of this operation included the assassination of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, along with several members of his family inside Tehran. In a single night, the United States and Israel attempted to do something that no Western power had ever done before: decapitate the leadership of the Islamic Republic entirely. The stated goals were the complete destruction of Iran's nuclear program, the elimination of its ballistic missile infrastructure, and, as Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu made explicitly clear in a televised address to the Iranian people, regime change. Come to the streets, Netanyahu said, speaking in Farsi. Come out in your millions, finish the job, overthrow the regime. These words were spoken as American and Israeli jets were still in the air dropping bombs on Tehran. Now, here's the thing that the analysts in Washington did not fully account for. When you kill a country's supreme leader and bomb its capital, you do not create chaos and surrender. You create rage. You create a unified enemy that was previously fractured. Iran, which had been experiencing massive internal protests just weeks before the war started, suddenly found its citizens rallying behind the military. Because whatever political differences Iranians had with their government, watching foreign bombs fall on their homes changed everything. And the Iranian military, battered but not broken, activated a strategy it had been preparing for decades. A strategy built not on matching American firepower, but on making American firepower irrelevant. Let us talk about what the first 48 hours of Iran's retaliation looked like, because this is where the story becomes extraordinary. Within hours of the first American bombs falling, Iran launched what it called its first wave of retaliation. Then came the second wave, then the third. By the time the fifth day of the war had passed, Iran had launched over 500 ballistic and naval missiles and nearly 2,000 drones. But here is the detail that shocked military analysts around the world. Approximately 60% of those strikes were not aimed at Israel. They were aimed at United States military bases across 9 different countries: Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Jordan, Iraq, Oman, and Cyprus. Iran had effectively opened a 9-front war against American military infrastructure across the entire region simultaneously. No adversary in modern American military history had ever done this before. Not Saddam Hussein, not Al-Qaeda, not anyone, and the scale of it was staggering. Iran struck more than 27 U.S. bases across the Middle East in a single coordinated campaign. The U.S. Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain was targeted multiple times. Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia, which hosts thousands of U.S. troops, was struck repeatedly with ballistic missiles. Camp Arifjan in Kuwait, Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, target after target after target. Now, America's missile defense systems performed remarkably under this pressure. The vast majority of incoming missiles and drones were intercepted. Saudi Arabia's Patriot systems, American naval destroyers, and Allied air defense networks worked around the clock to shoot down wave after wave of Iranian projectiles. But here is the brutal mathematical reality that nobody in Washington wanted to admit publicly. Every time you shoot down a drone that costs Iran $10,000, you're firing an interceptor missile that costs America between $1 million and $4 million. Iran was not trying to win every exchange. Iran was trying to bankrupt every exchange. This was asymmetric warfare at its most sophisticated. Iran had studied every American military operation since the Gulf War. It had watched. It had learned. And it had built its entire retaliatory strategy around one simple principle: make the cost of this war unbearable for America, not in soldiers, in dollars. And nowhere was this strategy more dangerous than at the entrance to the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow body of water just 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, sitting between Iran and Oman. And through that 21-mile gap flows approximately 20% of the entire world's oil supply every single day. 20%. Think about that number for a moment. 1/5 of all the oil that powers cars, planes, factories, hospitals, and economies across the entire planet passes through a waterway that you could almost throw a stone across. The United States had known for decades that this was Iran's ultimate leverage. Iran had threatened to close the strait for years. Military planners had wargamed the scenario hundreds of times. And yet, when it actually happened, the reality was far more complex and far more dangerous than any of those simulations had predicted. On March 2nd, just 4 days into the war, a senior IRGC commander made an announcement on state television that sent oil markets into a frenzy. The Strait of Hormuz was officially closed. Any vessel attempting to transit through Iranian-controlled waters without IRGC authorization would be considered a legitimate military target. The commander was not bluffing. That same day, an American-flagged tanker was struck twice at the port of Bahrain. A port worker was killed. The message was clear and it was immediate. Within 24 hours of that announcement, tanker traffic in the strait dropped by 70%. Ship after ship dropped anchor outside the strait, unwilling to risk transit. Insurance companies began canceling coverage for Hormuz transits entirely. Protection and indemnity insurance, the kind that allows ships to operate in war zones, was pulled by March 5th. The economic risk had become too high for commercial operators to absorb. And just like that, without firing a single nuclear weapon, without deploying a single ground troop, Iran had effectively shut down 20% of the world's daily oil supply. But the blockade itself was only half the story. Because while the world was focused on the political and economic dimensions of the Hormuz closure, something was happening in the waters of the strait that represented a genuine revolution in naval warfare. And this is the part of the story that the mainstream media has barely scratched the surface of. This is the part that keeps American naval commanders awake at night. Iran was deploying swarm drones in the Strait of Hormuz, not the kind of drones you think of when you picture a military drone, not the large, expensive satellite-guided systems that the US uses. Iran's Shahed series drones and its naval suicide drones are cheap, small, and terrifyingly numerous. They cost almost nothing compared to the defensive systems needed to stop them, and Iran had thousands upon thousands of them. When deployed in swarms, these drones overwhelm the targeting algorithms of even the most sophisticated air defense systems. Because a point defense gun can only aim at one target at a time. A missile battery has a limited number of rounds, but a swarm of 200 drones attacking simultaneously from different angles at different altitudes at different speeds creates a targeting problem that current naval technology simply cannot solve completely. The USS Abraham Lincoln, one of America's most powerful aircraft carriers, found itself in exactly this situation in the waters near the Strait of Hormuz. Iran claimed that after an encounter with Iranian naval drones, the carrier was forced to withdraw from the strait area. The Middle East Monitor confirmed this report, noting that the carrier pulled back from waters near the Hormuz after what the IRGC described as a successful drone engagement. The U.S. military has not confirmed the specific details of this encounter, but the strategic reality is undeniable. The USS Abraham Lincoln is no longer operating in the immediate vicinity of the Strait of Hormuz. And oil markets noticed immediately. Brent crude, which had already surged past $92 a barrel, climbed further on the news. Because the message that every oil trader and energy analyst on the planet took from that retreat was simple and terrifying. The United States Navy, the most powerful naval force in human history, cannot guarantee safe transit through the Strait of Hormuz right now. And the implications of that single sentence are almost impossible to overstate. Let us talk about what this means for the global economy, because this is where the story affects every single person watching this video. Every person who drives a car, every person who heats their home, every person who buys food at a grocery store, every person who has savings in a stock market or a pension fund. The Strait of Hormuz is not just important to the Middle East, it is the single most critical choke point in the entire global energy system. When the strait closes, the entire global economy starts bleeding. And it does not bleed slowly, it hemorrhages. Here is what the numbers look like right now. Brent crude oil had already risen more than 20% since the conflict began on February 28th. The International Energy Agency, recognizing the severity of the crisis, took the unprecedented step of approving the release of 400 million barrels of emergency crude oil reserves. 400 million barrels. That is the largest emergency reserve release in the history of the IEA. To put that in perspective, the previous record was 90 million barrels during the crisis caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The IEA released more than 4 times that amount, and oil prices are still above $90 a barrel and climbing. Because the market knows something that the emergency reserve release cannot fix. Reserves are temporary, they buy time. But if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed for weeks or months, no amount of emergency reserves can compensate for the sustained loss of 20% of global oil supply. The math simply does not work, and the ripple effects are already cascading through the global economy in ways that are both visible and deeply alarming. Gasoline prices at pumps across the United States and Europe have surged. Airlines are facing fuel cost increases that threaten to push several carriers back toward insolvency. Shipping companies that rely on Gulf routes are rerouting their vessels around the southern tip of Africa, adding weeks to transit times and dramatically increasing costs. The global supply chain, which was already fragile after years of pandemic disruption, is under severe new pressure. Inflation data in the United States, which had been showing signs of cooling just weeks before the war began, is now expected to reverse course sharply in the coming months. The financial sector is not immune either. Major international banks, including Citi and HSBC, have temporarily closed their Gulf office locations after Iran issued explicit warnings that it would begin targeting U.S.-linked financial institutions across the Middle East. Think about what that means for a moment. Iran is not just fighting a military war. It is waging an economic war simultaneously by threatening banks, by blocking oil, by targeting insurance systems, by making commercial shipping unviable. Iran is attempting to make this war so economically painful for the United States and its allies that the political cost of continuing becomes unsustainable. And according to analysts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the financial cost is already staggering. The first 100 hours of Operation Epic Fury alone cost the United States approximately $3.7 billion, largely unbudgeted, and that was just the opening phase. Now, while all of this is happening at sea and in global financial markets, the war on the ground and in the air is escalating in ways that are drawing more and more countries into the conflict. Let us look at what Iran has been doing across the Gulf states, because this represents a strategic dimension of the conflict that is genuinely unprecedented. Iran has been striking targets across 9 countries simultaneously. Missiles and drones have hit Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Jordan, Iraq, Oman, and even Cyprus, where an Iranian drone struck a runway at a British military base. And crucially, Iran has not been limiting its strikes to American military installations. It has been hitting civilian and commercial infrastructure as well. Dubai, one of the world's most important financial and logistics hubs, has been struck multiple times. 2 Iranian drones fell near Dubai International Airport, injuring 4 people. The airport continued operating, but the message was received loud and clear by every business and investor with exposure to the Gulf region. Even Dubai is not safe. Saudi Arabia has been under particularly intense pressure. The kingdom, which lobbied aggressively for the United States to launch this war, according to reporting from the Washington Post, is now facing the consequences of that advocacy. Iranian missiles have been intercepted heading toward Prince Sultan Air Base, which hosts thousands of American troops. Saudi air defense systems have been firing almost continuously, intercepting waves of Iranian ballistic missiles over the kingdom's eastern oil-producing regions. The economic vulnerability of Saudi Arabia's oil infrastructure to sustained Iranian drone and missile attacks represents one of the most significant wildcards in the entire conflict. If Iran were to successfully strike Saudi Aramco facilities at the scale of the 2019 Abqaiq attack, the impact on global oil markets would be catastrophic beyond current projections. Kuwait has been targeted repeatedly. 8 Iranian drones were shot down by Kuwait's National Guard in a single day. 2 Kuwaiti fire officers were killed performing their duties. A young girl died from shrapnel injuries. These are not the casualties of a distant conflict. These are the casualties of a war that is engulfing an entire region. Jordan has reported that 119 Iranian missiles and drones were aimed at its territory, injuring 14 people. Iraq's prime minister has called U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio to demand that his country not be used as a launchpad for American attacks. Lebanon has seen more than 800,000 people displaced and more than 600 killed as Israeli strikes have dramatically intensified alongside the Iran campaign. Iran's arsenal of attack drones and ballistic missiles is putting the U.S. military under unexpected strain. The key word there is unexpected. Iran's military budget is smaller than the GDP of the state of Vermont. Vermont, a single American state. Yet this country, with its modest defense budget, has managed to create an asymmetric warfare capability that is genuinely challenging the most powerful military force in human history. How? 3 things: volume, cost asymmetry, and strategic targeting. Volume first. Iran has been firing drones and missiles in waves, not single strikes, but continuous, relentless waves. Wave after wave after wave, 37 of them and counting. This volume-based approach is designed to exhaust both the physical capacity of defense systems and the psychological endurance of the people operating them. When your missile defense crew has been on alert for 12 days straight, shooting down incoming drones every few hours, every single day, human error becomes inevitable. fatigue becomes a weapon, and Iran understands this perfectly. Cost asymmetry second. This is the economic dimension of the military technology debate, and it is crucial to understanding why Iran believes it can win this war of attrition. Iran's Shahed 136 drone costs approximately $20,000 to produce. The interceptor missiles used to shoot it down cost between $1 million and $4 million each. That means every time Iran sends a drone and America shoots it down, Iran spends $20,000 and America spends up to $4 million. Run that calculation across 2,000 drones and the math becomes devastating. Bloomberg's analysts have described this cost asymmetry as one of the central strategic challenges facing the U.S. military in this conflict, and it is a challenge that cannot be solved quickly because it is fundamentally a hardware and manufacturing problem. You cannot overnight build cheaper interceptors. You cannot overnight change the cost equation, and Iran knows it. Strategic targeting third. Iran has not been firing randomly. Its strikes have been carefully calibrated to hit specific categories of targets that maximize economic and psychological impact, while staying just below the threshold that would trigger even more massive American escalation. The IRGC commander who oversees naval operations made a declaration that sent chills through the global shipping industry. Any ship attempting to pass through the Strait of Hormuz must first obtain Iran's explicit approval. Without that approval, it is a legitimate target. This was not a threat. This was a policy statement, and Iran immediately enforced it. The Royal Thai Navy released photographs of its cargo ship Meiri Nari engulfed in smoke after being hit while navigating near the strait. A Japanese-flagged vessel, the One Majesty, sustained damage at anchor in the Persian Gulf. The Marshall Islands-flagged Star Gwyneth was struck 50 nautical miles northwest of Dubai. By March 11th, 14 commercial vessels had been attacked. The message to global shipping was unambiguous. The Strait of Hormuz is closed, and Iran will enforce that closure with fire. Now, here is where we get to the political dimension of this crisis, and where the story becomes, frankly, astonishing in its complexity. Because while all of this military and economic chaos is unfolding, there is a political crisis developing inside Washington that represents one of the most significant challenges to American war-making authority in decades. Senate Democrats have emerged from classified briefings on the Iran war deeply troubled by what they heard, or more precisely, deeply troubled by what they did not hear. He said the briefings focused mostly on how the U.S. military was destroying lots of missiles and boat and drone factories. And then he asked the question that nobody in the administration seemed able to answer. What prevents Iran from rebuilding those capabilities? Murphy called the situation a potential endless war, and criticized what he described as a complete lack of planning to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Other Senate Democrats have raised similar concerns, warning that the administration has not laid out clear goals and demanding more public transparency. Even more remarkable is what is happening on the Republican side of the aisle. Representative Thomas Massie and former Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene have argued publicly that Trump started this war as a distraction from the Epstein files. Both the House and Senate have voted down war powers resolutions that would have required congressional authorization for the conflict, largely along party lines. But the margin was not as comfortable as the White House would have liked. And as the economic toll of the war rises, as gasoline prices climb and stock markets wobble, the political calculus in Washington is shifting. He claimed Iran's air force was destroyed, its radar systems eliminated, its missile capabilities down 90%, its drone capacity down 85%. These are extraordinary claims that independent military analysts have been unable to verify, because the Strait of Hormuz is still closed, because drones are still hitting Gulf states, because ships are still burning, and because the USS Abraham Lincoln is still not back in the strait. The contradictions in the American public narrative about this war are becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth declared that the U.S. and Israel were winning the war and rapidly meeting objectives. Yet, simultaneously, the Biden-era playbook of refusing to name specific war aims has carried over into this administration, leaving American lawmakers, American allies, and the American public unable to evaluate whether the war is actually being won or not. Because winning requires knowing what victory looks like. And right now, nobody outside the Oval Office seems to know what the definition of victory is in this conflict. Is it the destruction of Iran's nuclear program? That might already be largely accomplished. Is it regime change? That appears nowhere near imminent. Is it reopening the Strait of Hormuz? That is getting further away, not closer. Is it eliminating Iran's capacity to strike Gulf states? 37 waves of attacks suggest that goal is not yet achieved. Meanwhile, Iran's political situation has taken an unexpected turn that adds enormous complexity to any negotiated exit from this conflict. After the assassination of Supreme Leader Khamenei in the opening strike of Operation Epic Fury, Iran moved with surprising speed to name a new supreme leader. Mojtaba Khamenei, the deceased leader's son, has been appointed as the Islamic Republic's new supreme leader. Hamas congratulated the new leader and wished him victory in the war. And the new leader has shown absolutely no inclination toward the kind of negotiated settlement that would allow the United States to declare victory and go home. If anything, the killing of his father appears to have made any diplomatic off-ramp politically impossible for him to take in the near term. To negotiate now would be to legitimize the murder of his father, and that is not a political position any new leader can survive domestically. The assassination of Khamenei, which was intended to create a leadership vacuum and trigger regime collapse, may have instead created a leadership transition that is both more hardline and more personally motivated to fight. Which brings us to the humanitarian and ecological dimensions of this conflict that the world is only beginning to grapple with. The World Health Organization has issued a stark warning about what it is calling toxic black rain falling on Tehran and surrounding areas. When U.S. and Israeli strikes hit Iran's massive fuel depots and oil infrastructure, they created enormous fires that sent thick clouds of toxic smoke billowing tens of thousands of feet into the atmosphere. That smoke has mixed with rain clouds over Iran, creating contaminated precipitation carrying toxic pollutants, heavy metals, and carcinogenic compounds. This is not a theoretical risk. It is actively happening. The WHO is warning that communities across northern Iran may be exposed to long-term health consequences from this black rain for years to come. The fires from burning oil facilities, many of which are still burning 12 days after they were struck, are also contributing to what could become a significant regional environmental disaster. The carbon release from these fires alone is being tracked by climate scientists who describe it as potentially comparable to a medium-sized volcanic eruption in terms of atmospheric impact. Tehran itself has been transformed into something unrecognizable. A resident named Siper, quoted by Al Jazeera, describes keeping his front door unlocked so his family can sprint to an underground car park the moment the explosions return. Thick, toxic smoke blankets a city of 10 million people. Schools are closed. Businesses are shuttered. The eerie silence of a city under siege has settled over neighborhoods where millions of people are trying to figure out how to survive a war they did not ask for and did not start. Iran says more than 1,300 civilians have been killed and nearly 10,000 civilian sites have been struck since February 28th. UNICEF reports more than 1,100 children have been injured or killed. Hundreds of thousands are displaced. These are not military statistics. These are human beings. And the world's response to these numbers has been, with a few notable exceptions, strikingly muted compared to the outrage that would accompany similar civilian casualties in other contexts. The geopolitical realignment that this conflict is accelerating is equally significant and equally underappreciated. Spain has withdrawn its ambassador to Israel. European governments are rapidly expanding their military footprint around Cyprus. The UK, which has not participated militarily in the strikes, has seen Prime Minister Keir Starmer explicitly say he does not believe in regime change from the skies, while simultaneously signing a joint statement with France and Germany condemning Iranian counterstrikes. The international community is essentially split three ways: those who support the American and Israeli action, those who condemn it, and the vast, uncomfortable middle of countries that are horrified by the humanitarian costs and terrified of the economic consequences, but are too strategically dependent on the United States to say so publicly. China and Russia, meanwhile, have been watching this conflict with the kind of strategic interest that should alarm Western policymakers. China imports enormous quantities of oil from the Gulf. The Strait of Hormuz is as critical to China's economy as it is to any other major industrial nation. Yet China has been notably measured in its public criticism of Iran, which is a significant departure from its typical diplomatic posture. Russia, which was already in a position of providing Iran with military technology, is observing with great interest the performance of Iranian drone designs that were partially inspired by captured American UAV technology and improved with Russian and Chinese components. The battlefield data being generated in the Strait of Hormuz and across the Gulf states is the most valuable military intelligence that has been collected in decades, and both Moscow and Beijing are studying every single data point. Because here is the strategic implication that extends far beyond this specific conflict and reaches into the fundamental structure of global security. What is happening in the Strait of Hormuz right now is the first real-world demonstration, at scale, of whether a conventionally inferior military power can use swarm drone technology and cost asymmetric warfare to neutralize the conventional military superiority of the United States. If Iran succeeds in keeping the strait closed, if it succeeds in making U.S. naval operations in the Persian Gulf too costly to sustain, if it succeeds in exhausting American missile defense stockpiles faster than they can be replenished, then every military planner in Beijing, Moscow, Pyongyang, and Tehran will draw the same conclusion. The era of American naval supremacy can be challenged, not beaten in a direct confrontation, but challenged, eroded, and made economically unsustainable through asymmetric means. That conclusion, if it takes hold, will reshape every security calculation across the Indo-Pacific, Eastern Europe, and the Korean Peninsula simultaneously. The fermium question hovering over all of this is the one that no analyst, no government, and no military commander can answer with confidence right now. How does this end? Iran has said it is prepared for a long-term war of attrition that will destroy the entire American economy. Former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, speaking on Fox Business, put it with characteristic bluntness. If they can't keep it open, this war will in fact be an American defeat before very long, because the entire world, including the American people, will react to the price of oil if the strait stays closed very long. That is not a fringe view. That is a mainstream strategic assessment shared by analysts across the political spectrum. Because the oil is not a metaphor. It is not a side effect. It is the war. The Strait of Hormuz is the war. And right now, the war is not going in the direction that Washington publicly claims. The 2025 conflict, the 12-day war just months before this one, ended because there was a diplomatic off-ramp available through Omani mediation. The scope of that conflict was limited enough that both sides could accept a pause without losing face. This conflict is categorically different. The assassination of Khamenei removed the primary interlocutor. The declaration of regime change as a war aim removed Iran's incentive to negotiate. The massive escalation of strikes across 9 countries removed the ability to contain the conflict's scope. And the appointment of Khamenei's son as the new supreme leader, personally motivated by the assassination of his father, removed the possibility of quick, face-saving diplomacy. The 2026 war has, as Al Jazeera's analysis describes it, no diplomatic off-ramps. It is a war of attrition with 0 exit strategies visible from the outside. And so we return to where we started. That bridge, that aircraft carrier, those hundreds of drone contacts filling every screen simultaneously. Because the USS Abraham Lincoln's withdrawal from the Strait of Hormuz is not just a tactical event. It is a symbol. It is the moment when the abstract theoretical debate about drone swarms and cost asymmetry and Iranian military strategy stopped being theoretical and became real. The most powerful navy in the world pulled back from a 21-mile waterway because it could not guarantee the safety of its vessels against an adversary whose military budget is smaller than the annual revenue of a mid-sized American corporation. That is the strategic reality of March 2026. 20% of the world's oil is not flowing. 14 commercial ships have been attacked in 12 days. Oil prices are surging past levels that economists warn will trigger a global recession if sustained. Major banks are closing offices. Insurance markets are pulling out. Stock markets are wobbling. Governments from Tokyo to Paris to Washington are scrambling to figure out how to manage an energy crisis that was entirely foreseeable and yet somehow still caught the world off guard. And in the middle of all of it, in a city of 10 million people breathing toxic air under a sky darkened by burning oil fires, the people of Tehran are sleeping in their clothes, keeping their doors unlocked, listening for the sound of the next explosion. This is not a story about a Middle East war. This is a story about the limits of military power, about the moment when the most expensive weapons in history meet the cheapest effective countermeasures ever designed, about what happens when a nation with nothing to lose decides it will make a nation with everything to lose pay a price it cannot afford. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide. The gap between victory and catastrophe, it turns out, is even narrower than that. And right now, nobody in Washington or Tel Aviv or Tehran or Brussels or Beijing knows which side of that gap we are going to end up on. What they do know, what every market, every military analyst, and every geopolitical strategist in the world has understood since the moment the USS Abraham Lincoln turned around, is that the world changed on February 28th, 2026. And it is not going back to the way it was before. Not easily, not quickly, and maybe not at all. If you want to stay ahead of this story as it develops, because this is moving fast, and the next 48 hours could bring developments that dwarf everything we discussed today, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on, because this is just the beginning.